Okay. Ryan, can you just unmute and confirm you can see my screen for me?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay, great. So Ryan already did this bit, so I'm not going to repeat. But if you do want to have a look at the company, then the website is there for you. And you can also follow me on Twitter, because I love a bit of Twitter. That's, again, just recapping what Ryan has said. But what's kind of important to know is I've been doing this for 10 years, and there's a lot of companies that I have actively worked with. But then I've done a lot of mentoring. So the rough estimate when it comes to mentoring a variety of different businesses, and that does include SaaS as well, is over 400. And hopefully, I'll hit over 500 this year. We'll see how we go. What we're going to cover in this session, so I'm going to give you an overview of PR and comms, what they mean, how they differ, give you an understanding of how you can develop a story that works for media, and how you can actually engage them in the stories that you're creating, or the comments that you want to share, how to work with journalists, because that in itself is an art. There are many ways to get it wrong, and journalists, unfortunately, are the type of characters to very quickly tell you if you've got it wrong, and maybe put it somewhere public if you do. We'll also talk about how you need to amplify your news. So the most successful PR, specifically PR campaigns, are those that are underpinned by a wider communication strategy and other marketing activity. We're also going to talk a little bit about tone, and this is very important right now. So with everything that coronavirus is throwing at us and all of the problems it is creating for everyone in the world, tone has never been more important. I mean, it is always important, but right now it's very, very critical. And then I'm just going to provide you with a few simple resources in the most basic form that you can use them when you start working on your own PR and communications campaigns in the future. So the big difference between communications and PR is communications covers a much wider array of channels, and they're mutually understood channels. So these are how you get repeated communication with a customer. It could be how you're communicating with your staff or with external stakeholders or partners. It's something that doesn't actively involve working with the media, whereas public relations, PR, is how you do work with the media in order to get specific messages out to the public. And what, originally with PR, that would have been specifically working with journalists in traditional newspapers back when it was the print days. But now PR does kind of have a very large grey area, and PR kind of overspills to cover social media, and it overspills into other aspects of communications as well. But by its original definition, PR is about working with the media in order to get those key messages out there. But every single way you communicate, and particularly as you scale, needs to be tied to some form of strategy. So communications that is going outside of your organization to customers, stakeholders, whoever it might be, that does still need to be linked to what you're sharing internally. You need everyone to be beating from the same drum. So when it comes to thinking about your PR strategy, and I'm going to focus on PR specifically in this next section, but this can be tailored to work more closely on the other parts of communications channels. When you're thinking about what you want to do when it comes to media, you need to start at your end goal. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of startups that I've worked with and a lot of founders that I've worked with fall into this trap of coming to me and saying, oh, we just really want to be on the BBC, or, oh, we just really want to be on TechCrunch, and wanting to be in a specific title is not a goal for PR. PR is tied specifically to your business objectives, like all other aspects of marketing. So when you're thinking about what you want to achieve, that goal needs to be tied to what your business is looking to do in the next few months or in the next 12 months. You can set the time frame. So it might be that you're looking to specifically drive your customer acquisition. You might be looking to raise your profile as a way of making yourself look really good to investors. It might be as simple as just wanting to increase traffic because those numbers could be something that makes or breaks a deal. It might be that you've heard a competitor is going to launch a very similar product and you just want to make sure that people know about yours before they know about theirs. And it might even just be that for you to have a bit more clout when you're going into meetings with potential customers, if you're in B2B, you might want to raise your own profile as a founder, so that when you are trying to start those conversations and people look at you, they're just a lot more aware, or they've potentially already come across you, or they recognize the title that you've appeared in. So start with what you think you need to achieve, and that becomes your goal to drive a PR campaign around. So when you have an idea of what it is that you want to achieve, just like, within marketing, you need to understand who your key audience is. And this is a really useful set of questions to try and draw into when you're building out a customer persona, or you're doing interviews with your potential customers. You may have already done, you probably have done all of that, but if you do it again in the future, try and add a couple of questions which are much more focused on media consumption and the habits in which those people consume information. So you may already have an idea of who that target audience is, and for the benefit of this exercise, that audience could be your customer, or it could be an investor, or it could be a potential partner. You have an idea of who they are, an idea of what they look like, what makes them them, but then you need to know all of these other things. So what is it that they read? What do they watch? What do they listen to? Can you spot them on Twitter and see a bit of a trend in terms of who they follow? Are there particular influencers in the industry that they tend to kind of, watch for every word that falls out of their mouth and absorb? Do you have an understanding of how limited their time is? This is a big one in terms of how people consume media. At the moment, we're in a weird place with COVID-19 in that people are consuming media more than ever, but the media that they're consuming is focused on coronavirus. It makes it a little bit limiting at the moment, but that could change day to day. What generation are they? Are they the generation that is very happy to just listen to 2 podcasts every day as they commute? Or are they the generation that still wants to sit there and watch the 10 o'clock news? So this is a big one. Try and talk to your customer to kind of figure out where they sit in the media landscape. And that will help you in the next stage, which is actually researching and building a media database. So my role in PR is to have a very decent understanding of the who's who in the media that I need to get my clients in front of. And the way in which I've built those lists is by understanding the industry that my client is in, who it is that they're specifically looking to target, a little bit of an understanding of the generation. So are they going to be like wanting to see online media publications, or does getting a physical copy of the Financial Times still matter to that individual? And then doing the research to figure out who the most important journalists are in that space. So when you understand how your customer or your partner or your investor consumes media, then you need to start working on the research. So you may have an idea of specific titles that they may have already mentioned that are relevant to where you need to be appearing, and you can start to follow them. So the easiest way to understand how to create stories for journalists and for the media is to read it. And you should be trying to read and absorb all of the key things that are happening within the industry that you sit. So at any given point, you've got a few insights, you've got a few comments available to what's happening, and that helps you build a good story in the future because you already recognize what a good story is. So start following the channels and the publications that your audience are already engaging in, and then start reading stories that pop up that are highly relevant to you. So whether that's based on a competitor, whether that is specifically linked to a product that you've developed, or a customer, someone maybe you want to target is featured in that publication. Start reading them, and as you read them, take note of who the specific journalist is. So simple fact about all PR people is that we are actually very good stalkers, but we're stalkers that constantly remind journalists that we're there, which is the slightly less good part. So you need to follow these journalists on Twitter, and that's normally where the majority of them hang out. Go follow them on Twitter, and from there you'll be able to over time see what they're regularly talking about. Who are they engaging with? What are they commenting on? What stories are they sharing? And also via Twitter, you should typically be able to get hold of their contact details. So journalists deal in stories. They consistently want people to be in touch with them and giving them ideas and comments. So their email addresses are often on Twitter available for you to use. So with all of this, you can start to build this database. You can have the publication name, the name of the journalist, their contact information, and you can add notes into that. So provide comments for yourself in the future that reference specific articles that are related to what you do, or trends that you could potentially comment on. And this will all help further on down the line. The other ways in which you can build this database, really simple things. Use Google Alerts, set up an alert for your competitors, set up one for all of them, no matter how big, no matter how small. That in itself will show you which publications they're being covered in, and therefore it's highly likely and probably highly relevant to you to follow that publication. The other big one is you'll recognize who the influencers are in the space. So journalists in and of themselves are influencers, but there'll be regular people that pop up and provide comment. That could be that they're analysts, it could be that they're founders of businesses that are similar to yours but not direct competitors. Start to follow those people as well and potentially set up alerts for them. And what you can do is just add maybe 10 minutes to your morning or 10 minutes to your evening, or get someone else on your team to do this as well. And between you, over time, you'll build up pretty quickly a very solid database of contacts that you'll want to go to in the future. And the big thing is you'll be able to see exactly where you fit into in kind of the big tapestry of stories. The other thing that I've added in here, which is new, and it's something that we're doing at the moment, is actually just in that research to become really switched on and aware of how COVID-19 is impacting your industry. And also just to spot, from a journalist point of view, which journalists at that publication are regularly covering the impact of coronavirus or any stories that are related to it. You might want to follow that person, or you might want to avoid that person dependent on the story that you want to pitch. Because what we're seeing at the moment is that for every publication, no one can escape coronavirus. For every publication, they are starting to have a designated person or a team of people that are covering everything to do with that. And that may play in or against you in terms of favor, dependent on what it is that you want to pitch people. So you have an understanding of obviously where your end goal is, who your audience are, and then where, based on your research, you could potentially pitch yourself in the future. Now the big thing is to actually just think about what the story is. So it might be that you already have a story that's really obvious. You know, for a lot of the early stage startups that we end up working with, one of the first things that they use as a story and a way of getting their name out to the media is actually to talk about funding. Which a lot of people eye roll at, but funding stories are still important. They validate you to the market, they validate you to journalists, and they provide a platform to then start talking to them about bigger and better things. But it might be that you don't have a funding announcement. It might be that you've actually got some really insightful data, or you've got a particular take on something that's happening in the industry. You might be launching a new product. You might be updating a product. There could be a lot of different things that you can do. And in a moment, we'll touch on the different sorts of ways in which you can work with the media to tell stories. But these are some of the key things that you need to remember when you are crafting one. So overall, unless you are Apple, you're a small part of the story that you will tell. So the big thing for you guys with any messaging that you're creating is to remember that the problem that you solve is bigger. The pain point for your customer is bigger than your existence. So when you're creating a story, it's the problem that you solve that has really got to be highlighted, dependent on who it is that you're selling it to. Now, you also want to be thinking about the future. And right now, we all really need to be thinking about the future, so bear that in mind. But you want to talk about where we want to be 5 years from now. So if you're starting out and you are solving a problem, what does 5 years down the road look like in terms of your product or in terms of the mission of your company? You also want to say something new. So this is one of the big frustrations that journalists have a lot, is that people aren't unique in what they're sharing with them. There's a lot of me too. It's the same old. So try and be a little bit controversial in a nicely balanced way, but say something different that's actually of value, because that's one of the ways in which you'll get their attention. Know how you're different. I can hand on heart tell you that if you were to go to Mike Butcher, editor at large TechCrunch Europe, and he said to you, who are your competitors, what makes you unique, and you said, oh, we don't have any competitors, he would not write about you, because nobody has no competitors. If you don't have a direct competitor in terms of product or solution, well, then your competitor is the traditional way in which the market may have already been doing things. That's your competition. So you can talk very clearly about what makes you different. It's the same question you'll get from investors. If you cannot explain your USP, that is a problem. Use your data, and this is the big one for all of you. There will be a huge amount of data that you will collect, and obviously anonymize it, but there may be that you spot particular trends, and those trends, or breaking down that data in a really useful, insightful way, could in and of itself be a story. So keep an eye on your data and how it relates to various different things to do with the market that you operate in, or specific countries, geographies, could be anything. Keep an eye on it, because it might be that that is the story that you can create. And the question to always ask yourself is, why would anyone care about your product? And it's kind of a bit of a reality question, because one of the things that I see a lot with founders, particularly at the very beginning, when you've invested so much time into building your product and getting to where you are, it's very difficult sometimes to step outside and look back with a different view. And perception is everything. So ask yourself, why would anyone care? And really think about how you get the answer to that question across to a journalist. So these are a lot of different ways in which you can create stories, or provide ways in which stories can be built to journalists. So it's not just a case of writing a press release and providing journalists with some form of news to do with your business. It could be as simple as trying to organize a little profile opportunity of your company. And there are simple ways in which you can just build out a few stories that can be quite helpful from an SEO point of view. And then there are lots of other ways in which you can get the attention of a journalist without having to form a press release. So for instance, if you wanted someone to review your product, then all you really need to provide is an overview of the product itself and a pitch to a journalist with an offer to use the service. You don't need to actually do a formal press release for something like that. Awards and events and conferences are another way in which you can talk or be featured by the right people, and then from that, coverage may be delivered for you without you having to do any work. So we see this quite often sometimes in specific industries. If you were to apply for a specific award and you were shortlisted, or if you won, then usually the people organizing that will release some form of statement to the media and provide updates on who all the winners are. And that's sometimes, dependent on industry and trade, will result in coverage. Could be as simple as who you're hiring in some industries, and some trade publications specifically. That's a really big deal. It's not a big deal for everyone else, unless maybe, Jeff Bezos decides that he wants to step down from Amazon. We'll see. But there's lots of different ways that you can try and engage with journalists. So don't feel like you need to be limited because you don't have news right now. You can still create stories or ways in which you can be featured in the media via comment or profile or awards. It could be anything. So you've got an idea of who the journalists are and the publications are that you want to engage with. You may by now have figured out a way in which you want to engage them, or you've spotted an opportunity. And now you need to actually do the pitch. And this is the bit where a lot of people can fall down. So I've tried to provide a few tips for you. It might be that you have decided that you need a press release. And just to quickly give the lesson on press releases. So a press release, when it was first designed, it was designed in such a way that someone could effectively copy and paste it though it was probably via a typewriter then, copy and paste it, and it could go straight into a newspaper and it would look like an article. So a press release effectively summarizes the entirety of the story in the headline and the first opening paragraph or a couple of subtitles. Anyone reading the story should be able to tell you what the story is after just reading it for 10 seconds. And the reason for this is it's to do with attention spans, and it's also to do with the way in which newspaper articles were written. So if you open up a newspaper and you read a story, the headline and the first paragraph typically encompasses the whole thing. And then the further detail, the little snippets, the comments from people, that comes later. And this is based on the idea that if you were to open a newspaper, you can't quite say 100%, but it's probably somewhere between 70 and 90% of the headlines you would read. And then it goes down from there. It might be that you then see a particular news piece that you want to read and you'll read the first paragraph, and then the percentages drop down until you're maybe in the 5 to 1% that get all of the way to the end of an article. And don't quote me on the numbers, but that's why it's structured in such a way. So that's why when you create something like a press release, and this works for your email pitches as well, you need to be super attention grabbing in that first headline and the opening paragraph. If you can't capture their attention or succinctly show them what the entire story is, you're going to lose them. Journalists deal in stories, which means that they have to read the summary of hundreds of stories every day and then decide what are the 2 to 5 to possibly 10 or 20, if it's something awful like the Mail Online, are they going to write. So you need to make it really, really to the point and snappy. Other little things to bear in mind, press releases are factual, so they're not fluffy. You have to be neutral even when you're writing about your own product. The reason for that is it's not a sales document. It's a very different way of marketing. So you want to provide everyone with all of the facts that they need to then decide if they want to write it. And the only places where you can be really colourful and you can have a little bit more fun dependent on what it is that you're doing, that's in quotes. So quotes can have a bit more pizzazz, as it were, but everything else needs to be really neutral. You can't make claims without backing them up. You need to have hard data available or empirical evidence if you are making any sort of claim. And don't go too heavy on the number of quotes that you use. The reason I say this is ultimately at the end of the day, if you use a press release and you want your company to be the highlight of that press release, why would you dilute the number of quotes by inviting 3 or 4 other people to quote themselves in it? You want to make sure you are quoted. So limit the maximum number to 3. So if I was to give the example of a funding announcement, it might be that you have a quote from yourself, it might be you have a quote from 1 investor or 2 investors, or you might have a quote from you, a quote from an investor, and a quote from a customer to have a bit of variety. Share whatever you write with anyone that you think it should give you some feedback, just to make sure that you think everything makes sense. And the big test is to share a press release with someone and then ask them questions about it. And if they cannot answer with the answers that you want to hear, then you need to change your press release. This is a link. I will share this whole presentation with Ryan afterwards so he can share it with you guys. And I know this is being filmed, but this link is to a blog post that's on my own website. And this basically is a guide to writing a press release, but it's written as a press release. So hopefully it gives you an idea of format as well. When it comes to pitching journalists, I've already said they deal in stories. There is a huge amount of volume. Media at the moment is really difficult. You know, we talk about the effects of right now on an already struggling landscape. You've got more people needing to write more stories at the same time that there are less advertisers available to invest into them, which means that they're probably going to have to cut down on staff, but they still want to keep the same number of stories going out. That means there's going to be a lot of very stressed journalists needing to churn out stories super fast and be consistently worried about whether they're going to have a job in a week. So keep that in mind when you email these people. If you do not hear back from someone, it's highly likely that it is a no for them covering the story, but you can follow up with them once, at the most twice, and don't do it, less than 24 hours after you sent the first email. They'll probably then come back to you. If they say no and they're short with you, it's not that they're being rude, it's just that they don't have time, and no means no. Be really respectful of the no. The other thing to know as a general rule when it comes to journalists is if they do decide to write a story about you or feature you in some form of article, only ever take that as a 95% certain. And the reason is that you can do everything to get a journalist to write about you, but you cannot control what happens in the world, and you cannot control what their editor might do. So I've had this a few times in the past where, I've had a client do a half-hour interview with someone at the Times, and it's all looking really promising. And then I get a message from the guy that I know at the Times going, "Cathy, I'm so sorry, my editor cut them out." And it's because they have limited space and they just have to make decisions like that. There are no guarantees. The other issue I once had was there are this famous like royal couple. They had a baby 6 years ago. It was a really, really big deal, but that lost me a front page of the business section of the Telegraph because I can't control another woman's uterus, and I cannot control how other brands respond to the birth of a new prince. So, there are things that you just have to accept when it comes to working with journalists. What you can have a bit more control of is being aware of key dates and actively avoiding them. So making sure that you're not going to pitch when most people might be on summer holiday, or when Apple is going to announce a new product. All of that stuff usually is very easy to find out. So keep an eye on that and make sure that you're avoiding it where you can. Stay on top of trends and issues, because the more you do that, the more you can go back to a journalist that you want to engage and you can say, "Hey, I disagree with what's going on. Here is a comment from me on it. Happy to jump on a call and discuss." Provide them with helpful, useful information, and that will help develop a relationship for the future. Work with any partners that you're collaborating with to make sure that the time works for everyone. And when you're pitching journalists, email and Twitter are your friends. Anything else, don't do it. Phone is really difficult. When I started out 10 years ago, my bosses would force me to phone journalists because that's what I was meant to do, and it never really got us that far. There'd be the odd conversation that would lead to a piece, brilliant, but most of the time all I got told was, "Busy, send email." So just send an email, and as you build relationships with some people in the future, it might be that you can reach out to them on the phone. So with email pitches, just like with press releases, make it really engaging and be really upfront about what it is that you're offering them. So keep it short. If you're providing extra material, you don't need to consistently repeat everything. But what you do want to do is use the research you've done earlier to provide an angle or an offer for them that is specifically for them. So it's something that makes sense for what they've already been covering, and it shows that you're really aware of what they do. And actually, for a lot of journalists, that means a lot. But don't fall into a trap that I see a lot of other PR people fall into, and other founders who've been told this. If you're going to reference something that they have written, don't just say, "Hey, I really enjoyed your piece on X," or "Hey, I really enjoyed this article with a link." Tell them why you enjoyed it, because it's really easy for someone to just find an article quickly with some buzzwords and chuck it into a pitch and hope that that makes a difference. Actually go the extra mile and say, "Look, I really appreciated your take on this. I actually disagree with this person that was quoted in it because la 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 la." Actually do the homework, and it will mean a lot for them. For everything else, make it really easy. So if you're going to send a press release or you're going to send them some data to feature, give them everything else that they might need for that story. So create your own press pack. We normally refer to it as kind of like a press kit. Some people say media kit. This is just a file of assets that journalists need in order to quickly get pieces up and online. And that usually means they want a headshot, or they want a team shot, or they want product shots. They might want some added data or just kind of key facts about your business. All of these things over time can be added into a press kit, and you can just pop something like that on an open Google Drive in a folder with an open link. So whenever you send anything to a journalist, you just send this link by default, And what it means is if they do need a photo, they won't have to email you. And if you're unavailable, they won't have to hold the story, or you potentially risk losing the story. Make it super easy because they're super time poor. Offer interviews where possible. Increasingly, we're seeing less journalists do interviews. There's a lot more that are just happy to send questions over on email, but then they do need people to answer them really quickly and come back. Journalists, if they want to jump on the phone, it's either because it's a really heated topic or it's just really hot to get to press. So bear in mind, if they want to have a phone call, it also means that they probably don't want to send you questions in advance. So be very aware that if you are going to go down the route, you might want to do some prep in advance just to feel comfortable when you're talking to them. I'm not going to read through all of these. I will leave this with you to digest separately, but these are just 4 specific terms that come up very regularly talking to the press. So going off the record, on background, which is sort of similar, but on background normally means that you're just providing some insight and not expecting to be covered. You're basically building a relationship with them. And embargo and exclusive. Embargo is a very critical one to understand. That is an agreement that no one talks about a specific piece of news until a specific time, and neither you nor a journalist can break it. But I will leave you to digest that separately. So right now it's an interesting time to pitch news. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, even just getting direct marketing campaigns from businesses right now, I'm being super critical of what comes my way. There are some businesses that are doing really well in terms of actually being empathetic to everyone in the environment that we're in. I've seen businesses who basically are almost kind of ignoring the big coronavirus-shaped elephant that's in the room. And it's completely tone deaf. And you need to bear this in mind if you're going to approach media. So everything going on right now needs to have the lens of coronavirus applied to it, because it is impacting everything. And whether it directly impacts the story or the offer that you're making to a journalist or not, coronavirus itself is impacting that person and it's impacting you. So these are just some of the takes that I personally have on working with media right now. And it's come from talking to journalists who are close friends. So, you know, you can be empathetic, you can be vulnerable, you know, nobody can hide from coronavirus and the impact it's having on the world right now. And you can be really open. I think if you were to email someone and it's really, you know, super businessy, and I hope that makes sense, but very kind of corporate speaking, and you don't even mention it or even say like, how are you doing, or remind someone, you know, we're all in the same boat, it's not going to come across well. So you can also be incredibly considerate. Journalists, it's a different environment for them right now. In the UK, you know, they're not in the news office, they're not at a news desk, everything is being rerouted. If you're someone like the BBC with 2,000 journalists that you manage, this is a nightmare, and you still need to create content. So be really considerate of what you're asking people or what you're offering them. We do need good news. So even if it's good news related to coronavirus or with that lens applied to it, share it with the world. Where we're at the moment, so, you know, I'm based in Spain. We've gone into week 3 of lockdown, and my Spanish is terrible, so I'm still learning, but you kind of get a general gist for the media. You're at a point where right now I don't really want to read all of the articles that remind me how many people are passing away or how many people are ill. I kind of want to know what might happen in the future. So whether that's the impact it has on industries, the impact it has on us personally, anything like that, that's going to increasingly become the case for everyone. You know, every specific industry, whoever your target market is, will be talking about what coronavirus means for us and what do we need to change, what opportunities are there in the future. So try and have an opinion on that and be an expert, offer yourself up. Now, if you're kind of starting out, or you haven't worked with the media before, it's very difficult to pitch yourself as an expert straight off the bat. But what you can do, and this is where communications can help underpin a PR strategy, is if you have an opinion about what's going on right now, share it on the channels that you own. So media is earned, but social media is owned. So go and put it on your LinkedIn or comment on someone else and what they're doing. Make sure your social media profiles are up to date. So it clearly states that you're the founder of a business and that your business maybe has social media handles as well. Make everything in such a way that it backs up who you claim to be when you say to someone, I'm an expert. The other key thing is to, and this is the tricky one, is to balance getting stories out there during the time of a pandemic with being too opportunistic. And I think the way in which people are dividing those at the moment is the companies that are being seen to be too opportunistic are the ones that aren't helping people. And every business right now can help people. I'm helping people right now. I'm chatting to you, and I do hope that this is helpful. But in addition to this right now, I'm running regular coffees with people so that I can just lend them my brain if it's at all helpful to their business. It makes me feel better about the situation and that I'm being valuable in some form. And I'm a micro business. So on a larger scale, it might be that you can be a little opportunistic and you can still have empathy and you can do some good and you can create some good news by finding a way in which you can help people in the next 1 to 2 months. That could be big discounts, could be giving them free access to a portion of whatever your offering might be. Try and find a way that you actually remain human and helpful rather than just coming across looking like a business that just still wants to really make money from people when things are a bit tight. I pulled this from a thread that I found on Twitter earlier. So marketing examples are a good handle to follow. They're sharing quite a lot at the moment because in this current environment, everyone is very quick to be critical. We all kind of become keyboard warriors, and these are the people that you want to try and avoid, and that's why you need to get the balance right. So on the left of the screen is an email that got sent from the CEO of Revolut. Now, the reason for sending this email was because of concerns from customers about the business and whether it was going to keep going in the current climate. So I do understand why some of these messages have been included. However, I do agree with the way in which marketing examples have analysed it and said this is what the tone sounds like. Now, the other example on the right is from Levi. Now, they're very different businesses. One is I look after your money, and one is I make your butt look good with trousers or jeans. But Revolut could still pull some inspiration from a slightly more empathetic and human email. The other problem here with Revolut specifically, and I don't know how aware everyone is of Revolut. I think they only just recently launched into the US. They've had issues with PR and comms in the past in terms of bad messages that have got out there regarding the way in which they were hiring people, and not being very fair and having a very terrible culture. So for them, me kind of looking in external comms person, I'm looking at this and going, right, understand the reason to make sure that your customers know that everything is okay, your money's safe, the business will continue as normal. But at the same time, if you've already got bad juju out there in the world, this is not quite the right tone to have done this. And it's a real problem right now. So do really think about how you use language and tone, and maybe before you send anything out, share it with a few people and a few people that aren't specifically in your industry. Get outside input, get a different perspective on what it is that you're putting out there. Another quick tip, because it's something else I've seen a few other businesses fall flat on. If you already have content or direct marketing emails that are going out that are scheduled, and you scheduled them before major things have happened in terms of coronavirus and lockdowns, go and double check those messages before they go out, because it might be that your tone is completely off and you had no idea. So go and double check anything you've written before. The echo chamber. So this is where communications helps in terms of supporting PR. And I've broadened this to include a few other channels as well. I'm going to try and touch on them really quickly. And I'm also just going to check time because I know I'm cutting. I've got a few more things to get through. So first thing to know is the news cycle is really short, and right now it's getting shorter and shorter. With the number of updates that we're getting, it's really hard to stay on top of everything, and it all changes so quickly. But usually a news cycle is maybe less than 12 hours. If I'm thinking about something happening in the tech world and it's going up on social media, it's probably dead within a day. So you are in charge of making sure that that news lasts longer. And this is where using social media and the community that you've built and your customer database all helps. So think about before anything goes out to a journalist, think about how you're going to make sure that whatever goes live lasts for as long as possible. The other thing to consider is what stories you can create that naturally will carry on for longer. And this is usually where research-based or data-based stories are really, really helpful. So as I said earlier, think about how you can use the data that you have available. It might be that you see that there's a particular trend happening, or that trend could create an annual report that you release, I don't know, every March. And that annual report, the data is referred back to by numerous publications for months and months and months and months to come. So something to bear in mind if you want to have continued recognition of your brand. So really quickly, social media. So obviously we can all create our own content and we can put it out there into the world very, very easily now. But social media, usually for startups that I've worked with, it's usually something that's kind of forgotten about. They have it, maybe someone tweeted from it 3 months ago. It's not been used again since. The founder doesn't even really use their own LinkedIn platform to share stuff, or the team doesn't retweet things and engage with it. You've got social media to grow an audience and grow a captive audience that wants to engage. So try and put the time and energy into it at a time that is right for you, okay? Don't make it an afterthought. So actually think about it in terms of strategy. And it's a quick tip from us. This is something that we try and stick to as a bare minimum when you're sharing content on social media. There'll be different reasons to post different things on different channels. So for most SaaS businesses, if your target market is completely B2B, then Instagram probably not somewhere you need to be. Facebook, highly unlikely that it's somewhere that you need to be. But Twitter and LinkedIn and potentially Reddit are all very useful. Now, you might want to specifically use LinkedIn to share that you're hiring. You might want to mention it occasionally on Twitter. It might be that on Twitter, it's where you want to be much more active in engaging with journalists or other influencers in the space. Have a think about what you want to share on each channel so that it's got a specific remit. There will be overlap. But then when it comes to the content that you share on social, 70% of your content, which I think is a pretty decent rule to follow, 70% of that content, it should be related to what you do, but not about you. So it shouldn't be sales-driven content. It should be helpful to your customers. It could be sharing news from the industry and providing your take on it. It could just be something a little bit silly, because quite rightly, like now, everyone needs a little bit of comedic relief, and I don't see any reason why a business shouldn't provide a little bit of that as well. The other 30% can be much more about you. And the reason for that is no one is going to follow a channel if you're just consistently going, me, buy me, use me, come over here and buy my product. Just focus on how you can build a relationship with the individual that decides to follow you on Twitter. And that all ties back to the research that you'll have done on the audience side of things. Other little tips. I won't read through every single one of these. You can read these afterwards, but simple ones are making sure that your website is available on every single social media channel that you use. Make sure that if you are trying to get anyone who follows you to engage with you, that there is a clear call to action. And make sure, if you can, even if it requires spending a bit of money to do so, that all of your social media handles are the same, because it just makes you much more discoverable. And no one really wants to try and remember that Twitter is join Cathy and Instagram is, oh, look at Cathy, and LinkedIn is shake hands with Cathy. Like, you need to make it really, really, really simple. Your own content. So you can share news whenever you want. The difference is that you need to try and get people to read it still. So you can use your website, and you can use this to test different messages as well. I won't go into too much detail on that because you'll all probably know a lot more about that than me anyway. But your website is a huge, huge, huge resource, and you can create so much added value content for your customers that can live in your website, whether it's thought leadership articles, white papers based on research, ebooks, anything. You've got so much opportunity in content. So do think about how content can support your PR activity, because you can share news again and again, and you can share your expertise. The big thing with any content, though, is to write it in such a way that it's going to be easily understood by the person that you want to target. So a lot of businesses, when they're first starting out, the trap that we can often fall into is we become very descriptive in quite a technical way about what it is that our product does, rather than what our product enables. And does and enables are very different. So this is literally what we do, the tech version, and then there's, oh, this is the problem that we solve, and that's the sales version. So really think about the language, and this is much more kind of marketing focused than just my typical PR head, but language is critical. And dependent on your political standing, there is a reason that Trump did better in the 2016 election, and that was predominantly down to the fact that the average 10-year-old could understand what Trump was on about. So really think about simplifying what it is that you say and make it really compelling. And big thing is to think about how you can create content for a long time. Content does take investment, both in terms of your writing capability, making sure that the language is good, making sure that the topics are compelling or insightful, helpful. But you can usually do a bit of planning in a couple of hours, and it's a really good thing to split amongst a team until you maybe get to a point where you can hire someone to just create consistent content for you. So build out a content plan. I have a copy of one that we've used internally. So this is from a while back now, start of 2018. But this was split amongst the team. So we kind of had the date that we wanted something to go live. We had a title, quick brief of what it was that we wanted that article to focus on, who from the team was going to do it. And then this is all still on one big epic long Google Doc, and we get to a point where we can just mark it as published. There are much more sophisticated tools that you can use that are not a Google Doc, but this is the simplest way that we've been able to do it in-house. So that gives you a little snapshot of what a content calendar looks like. The other thing you've got that's an option is newsletters. So, newsletters can go to your customers as you keep building them up. Or it could be that you kind of extend it out to your wider community or people that have just generally been in touch. This is just a really nice way that, again, you can amplify your news, and you can publish a newsletter as often as you want, as long as it's still being read and engaged. So make sure it's really relevant to the person that you're sending it to, that it's not, again, too me. We do a newsletter occasionally. I'm trying to bring it back at the moment while I have some more time. And what we try and do with our newsletter is we actively try and provide advice. So for really small businesses that are starting up, that maybe right now aren't our ideal customer, but they could be with a funding round or a little bit more work, we're giving them some advice on how they can best write a blog post, or how they can engage journalists, the sort of stuff we've covered through here really, but in little snapshots that just drop into their inbox. And then we maybe feature a few examples of where clients have been seen in the press, and I maybe have one call to action that's related to CEW, like come and read a blog on our website. Try and think about what you put into a newsletter with the same consideration that you apply to your social media and to your owned content. Community. So the more you do, the wider your community gets, which means that you've got ambassadors for your company. So as you have news, even just a simple email to a few people that are on this list, it could result in someone sharing it on social media, which again amplifies what you've already done. So you might want to email them a few hours after something goes live. You might want to email them the following day. It depends on what you do, but try and just think about all of those different little groups of individuals that you can turn to and go, hey, this is awesome, we're in TechCrunch, share it. Another thing you can look at is events. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one because of time, but depending on what it is that you want to create stories for, or who it is that you want to create stories for, it might be that you can create a much bigger story around a moment, or the moment itself could become a story. So, you know, whether you think about maybe right now having a virtual conference, getting a few different experts within your industry together, or a few customers, and having an open conversation about a particular theme, and then writing that up, sharing it with a few journalists as insights, or producing a content piece for your website. There are a lot of ways in which events, both virtual and in person, have a part to play in what you do. And you can do things for yourselves. You can think about owned events, or you can think about how you can piggyback off of external events or work with partners to create something much bigger. And that might come in time, but events are always something to think of. And you might possibly hear it now, but the clap in Spain has started. I don't know if you can hear it or not. If you, Ryan, if you give me a heads up, I can quickly show everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah? All right, hold on. You just, screen.
Hey.
Okay. Woo. Stop share.
Yep.
Right, you can see me. Ooh. It's a little Spanish clap.
Very nice. Very nice. Fantastic. So
there you go.
That's awesome.
I'll go back to it now, sorry.
Okay.
It will keep going. You'll hear whooping in a minute. They get very excited. Okay. It's not what I wanted. Oh, wait, you can see my screen, can't you?
So just a side note, Cathy, every time I share my screen, I get so much grief because I've got a zillion Chrome tabs open. It seems like you've got a zillion other things open down the bottom.
It's world of PR. It's just, I consistently have multiple documents and news sites and everything open. It's just a bit hectic, but you kind of get used to working in
good to see I'm not the only one.
No, you're not. You're fine. So that's events. I'll just move on. The clapping will stop in maybe a couple of minutes, sorry. So things to consider. So with any kind of PR or comms strategy that you're pulling together, you need to think about how you're going to measure success. And the really frustrating thing generally in PR and in comms is that there are certain ways in which you can analyze growth, but actually measuring success is a much more difficult thing to do, particularly with PR, because a lot of publications now don't include hyperlinks. They will mention your name and it may improve your brand awareness. That might be the difference between a CEO of a specific business noticing you or not, but you might not ever know for certain if it was that specific publication that did it. So have a think about how you want to measure the success of any campaign you do. It might be as simple as having some ideas on engagement numbers, so the number of social media followers that you had at the beginning of the campaign versus at the end of it. You might want to look at Google Analytics and just see, is there a spike in traffic to the website that started after a specific piece went live or after there was a bout of news? Can you therefore guess, is that as a result of the coverage that happened? It might even just be that you actively see your revenue increasing at the same time that PR and all of this other stuff is going on. you can pick a few things, and then the other trick is actually just when you're talking to customers or they're coming to you, the old classic of how did you hear about us or where did you find us? Even just asking people in person, it can give you a really good indication of what's going on. Here are a few resources, very basic versions. There are obviously much more sophisticated tools out there that you can use. I'm just a bit old school in that tools don't necessarily give me all of the things that I want, so therefore I just try and build things myself. This is just a channel mapping example. So based on a feature going live, or potentially our feature is a specific campaign, what are you going to do across all of the different channels that you have? This is Kermit. I think everyone knows Kermit. Ryan will have much better versions of this than me. This is just a super basic customer persona sheet. The main point here is to focus on the bottom right. So where do they get information? So it's just a bit of a prompt to ask people, you know, what is it that you like to read, listen to, watch, just to get a bit more of a sense of where you need to be targeting your efforts. Again, Ryan has better versions of these. This is a messaging matrix. The key thing here is to think about, from a PR perspective, a news perspective, what is the key message that you want someone to get when they read about you? So think about that primary message that might be an elevator pitch of 1 or 2 sentences, then the secondary pitch, and then all of the other little points that they want. And it might be it's the same for a customer as it is for a partner. It might be completely different, but it's a really good exercise to work on what those messages are and to work on simplifying the language. So in the UK, very notorious publication is The Sun. I don't know how many people have heard of The Sun. It's kind of known as being a red, it's one of these newspapers that has a red logo. So it's kind of a bit more lowbrow. But The Sun, in its direction to journalists who are writing articles, it basically says you have to write an article at the reading age of a 10-year-old, which is basically where Trump is. The language needs to be that simple. It's like in tech kind of saying, you know, does something pass the mum test? Apply the same thing but with language. Is it really easy for someone to understand what it is that you're trying to get across? I won't touch on this. I recently did this presentation for another group, and there were a few questions that came off of the back of it. I've just left them in here in case helpful. The top one there is actually asking, you know, do you have an example of a database that someone's created? I can't share databases because of GDPR, but what I have added is just a few fields that you might want to have and try and populate as you grow. This is my offer to everyone here. So I mentioned earlier that my way of trying to help people right now is just offering virtual coffees. So it's basically half an hour of my time, one-to-one, to talk about anything on that list or anything else. Like I'm getting quite bored in Spain. But if you want to talk about PR or comms for your business, or you just want to talk a bit more about marketing strategy or get some feedback on a product, anything, I'm open to it. So again, I'll share this presentation with Ryan, and you'll be able to book me using that Calendly link at the bottom. That's a bit about my company. I will leave that with you to have a look. And that's that. So should we, I'll switch back to camera view.